On Thanksgiving Day, while everyone gathered around the table expecting a holiday meal, my parents stood up and publicly announced, in front of the entire family, that they were cutting me out of the family business. No warning, no conversation, just cold betrayal served with dessert. Mark represents what's next. You're simply a letdown, my son. My father sneered. We knew you'd never amount to anything. They lifted their glasses in celebration of their triumph. I offered them a smile for the insight and departed. Today, precisely 6 months later, their calls flooded my phone hourly, pleading for assistance, their frantic messages begging, "Please call us back. Thank you for joining me here today. I trust you're enjoying a wonderful day wherever you are. I'd appreciate it if you could share in the comments which city or country you're tuning in from, and what time it is there right now. Let's embark on our narrative together." The scent of roasting turkey once symbolized security, a sense of belonging. It was the fragrance that permeated our home every fourth Thursday in November, a comforting shield against the outdoor chill. But this year, the aroma felt oppressive, stifling, clinging to everything like a veil of apprehension. It was Thanksgiving, and my parents had invited the entire extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, not just for dinner, but to witness my public downfall. I'm Alex, in my early 30s, and for as long as I can recall, my existence revolved around two pillars, my family and the family enterprise. From sweeping the floors of the old mill my grandfather established, to toiling late nights analyzing figures and refining supply chains, I invested everything into it. It wasn't merely work, it was my essence, my destiny, the connection I perpetually sought to forge towards my parents' affirmation. We were the Martins, we constructed things, we achieved success, and I was meant to be a part of that heritage. My brother, Mark, was 4 years my senior, charismatic, charming, skilled at eloquent speech. Yet, he never possessed the same grit or devotion to the business that I did. He was the favored offspring, effortlessly impressive in my parents' estimation. While I was deciphering inventory management software, Mark was at the country club cultivating connections. While I was negotiating with vendors, Mark was captivating prospective clients over lavish meals. It stung naturally. Every casual commendation for Mark, every slightly dismissive remark about my own long hours, felt like a minor wound. My parents, particularly my father, had a knack for it, a specific gaze, a shrug, a phrase like, "Alex just enjoys tinkering," as if the intricate operational enhancements I implemented were merely a pastime. My mother would frequently smooth things over, but her solutions invariably involved me making compromises for the sake of familial harmony. I attempted to converse with them, to articulate my desire for a more defined role, for acknowledgement, but I consistently encountered the same barrier of gentle dismissal or outright manipulation. "You're overly sensitive, Alex," my father would say, his eyes already glazing over. "Mark requires assistance. He's stepping into a leadership position." The objectives always seemed to shift, and I was perpetually just out of reach. Despite the escalating discomfort, I clung to optimism. I believed in the potential of the enterprise, and I believed, naively, in the enduring strength of kinship. Last year, I had spearheaded a project that yielded substantial financial savings, uncovering efficiencies no one else had identified. I thought, surely, this would validate my worth. But the credit was vaguely assigned to the team, with Mark conveniently positioned as the figurehead who oversaw it. It was disheartening, like completing a marathon only to have someone else presented with the medal at the finish line. My abdomen was a coiled serpent most days, constricted with a blend of apprehension and vexation. This Thanksgiving felt distinct, however. The invitation was framed with additional warmth, extra emphasis on the entire family convening. A minuscule, desperate part of me wondered if this was it, the moment they would recognize my years of commitment, perhaps even announce a significant position for me alongside Mark. It was a foolish hope, a final spark in a fading flame, but I clung to it as I drove to their residence. The house carried the aroma of roasting turkey and something else I couldn't quite identify, perhaps the expensive scented candles my mother favored, or simply the stale air of unspoken grievances. The customary bustle of extended relatives was present, a performance of holiday cheer. My aunts and uncles offered strained smiles and the usual pleasantries. "Still working hard, Alex?" one uncle inquired, patting my shoulder, his tone implying it was a less impressive pursuit than Mark's strategic endeavors. Mark himself held court by the fireplace, looking sharp in a new sweater, laughing boisterously at something my father said. He glanced at me, a brief, almost sympathetic look, before returning to his audience. I felt the familiar sting of being the perpetual stand-in, always in the background, never in the spotlight. Dinner was a tense affair beneath the veneer of polite conversation. The table was laden with food: turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, all the customary comforts that felt like disguises tonight. I was seated near the end of the table, away from the head where my father sat, and where Mark was prominently positioned to his right. Conversations flowed around me, centered on family gossip, Mark's recent achievements, and the latest golf scores. Every time I attempted to contribute a point about the business or a recent obstacle we'd overcome, my parents would redirect the conversation back to Mark's vision or a safer, more superficial topic. The atmosphere thickened with unspoken tension, a storm gathering behind my parents' seemingly relaxed smiles. I observed them exchanging glances with Mark, small, knowing looks that completely excluded me. There was a sense of anticipation in their eyes, a readiness for something. My fork felt heavy in my hand, the perfectly cooked turkey tasting like ashes in my mouth. Then my father rose. He tapped his fork against his glass, the sound reverberating through the sudden quiet. Everyone turned to him, expectant smiles fixed on their faces. He began to speak, his voice booming slightly, commencing with the usual platitudes about gratitude, family, and custom. My heart, against my better judgment, fluttered with that last dying ember of hope. Perhaps he was going to acknowledge all of us, perhaps even me. But his gaze quickly settled on Mark, his voice softening, filled with a warmth and pride I had longed for my entire life. He spoke of the future, of elevating the business to the next level, of leadership and foresight. He discussed the qualities required to lead, listing attributes I knew I possessed in abundance, but he ascribed them all to Mark. Mark preened under the commendation, a smug, self-satisfied expression spreading across his face. Then came the pronouncements, the ones that would forever divide my life into before and after. My father looked directly at me, his smile fading into that familiar, slightly bored expression he reserved for my deficiencies. "Mark is the future," he declared to the room, his voice regaining its volume. Then, quieter, but piercing the silence like a blade, he added, "You're merely a disappointment." The world seemed to tilt. The background hum of the house vanished. The aroma of turkey disappeared. All I heard was the ringing in my ears. All I saw was his face, the coldness in his eyes. He wasn't finished. Leaning forward slightly, a smirk playing on his lips, he twisted the blade deeper. "We knew you'd never amount to anything." The quiet in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint sound of my own ragged breathing. I felt the gaze of everyone in the room on me. Cousins, aunts, uncles, individuals I had shared holidays and family gatherings with my entire life. Some appeared shocked, some looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Some I observed it on a few faces, a subtle nod, a silent concurrence. They had absorbed the narrative my parents propagated, and they believed it. I was the letdown, Mark was the favored child. It was confirmed, publicly, irrevocably. Then my mother, ever the orchestrator of the family gathering, gestured to a waiting server. A tray of champagne flutes was brought out, already filled. They were prepared for this. They had planned this. They were toasting my public humiliation, my official severance from the legacy I had helped construct. My father and mother raised their glasses, their smiles returning, triumphant. Mark raised his glass, looking awkwardly pleased with himself. The physical sensation was intense. My chest tightened as if someone had wrapped barbed wire around my lungs. My hands trembled slightly on the table. The humiliation was a hot, stinging wave, followed by a cold, paralyzing shock. But then something shifted within me. The pain was immense, yes, but it was instantly cauterized by absolute, searing clarity. The last ember of hope died. The years of denial, of clinging to the belief that they would eventually perceive my worth, evaporated. They didn't see me, they never had. They saw a tool, a contingency plan, something to be discarded when the preferred model was ready. In that moment, looking at their celebrating faces, the coldness in their eyes, the pre-planned champagne, I knew. I knew who they were, and I knew who I was. And I was not going to permit their definition to stand. A peculiar tranquility settled over me, born from the demise of hope. It wasn't resignation, it was liberation. I rose slowly, my chair scraping against the floor, a small, jarring sound in the silent room. Every eye was on me. I met my father's gaze, then my mother's, then Mark's. I managed a small, genuine smile, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes because there's a universe of sorrow behind it. My voice was quiet, perhaps a little unsteady, but clear. "Thank you," I said, my gaze sweeping across their faces, taking in their sudden confusion, the halting of their celebration. "Thank you for the clarity." I allowed the words to linger in the air, letting them comprehend or not comprehend the profound weight of what they had just done. I nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, not of defeat. Then I turned and walked out of the dining room, through the hallway filled with the specters of happier Thanksgivings, opened the front door, and stepped out into the cold November air. The sound of the door closing behind me felt like a final, decisive punctuation mark. I got into my car and drove. I drove aimlessly at first, the familiar streets a blur through the tears that finally came, hot and fast, now that I was alone. The meticulously constructed facade I had maintained for years shattered in that car. The anguish was a tangible entity, a heavy burden crushing my chest, stealing my breath. I pulled over to the side of a quiet, tree-lined street, the car filled with the sound of my own ragged, broken sobs. I slumped against the steering wheel cold beneath my forehead, feeling utterly devastated, mercilessly betrayed by the very individuals who were supposed to be my foundation. This was rock bottom. This was the juncture where the choice was stark, vanish or resist. In the quiet darkness of that car, amidst the wreckage of my heart, the resolve solidified. The clarity from the dining room returned, cold and sharp. They had revealed who they were. Now I would reveal who I was. This wasn't solely about the business anymore. It was about self-respect. It was about boundaries. It was about refusing to let them define me, to crush me. The naive hope for their affection was dead, and in its place, a cold, focused determination was born. I would not accept this. The subsequent few days were a haze of emotional distress and practical action. Sleep offered little respite. I avoided calls and texts from extended family members, uncertain who was genuinely concerned and who was merely seeking gossip. My first call was to my friend Sarah. She listened without judgment, her quiet support a lifeline in the storm. She reminded me of my worth, independent of my family name or their enterprise. Her apartment became my temporary sanctuary, a place free from the suffocating weight of expectation and betrayal. My next call was to a lawyer Sarah recommended, a woman named Emily Carter. Emily specialized in business law and intricate family disputes. Sitting in her office, recounting the Thanksgiving dinner felt surreal, like describing a scene from a particularly cruel play. But as I spoke, and Emily listened with a calm, knowing expression, the surreal became real. She didn't minimize my feelings or tell me I was overreacting. She spoke of legal standing, of potential claims, of documentation. She validated my reality, making me feel less alone, less insane. "What they did is wrong, Alex," she said, her voice firm but compassionate. "And it has legal ramifications." Working with Emily was a process of meticulous investigation. We began compiling every piece of documentation I possessed, old emails, performance reviews, financial statements I had access to from my time in operations, even old handwritten notes about projects I'd led. It was laborious, painful work, a constant reminder of everything I had poured into the business and the family. Deep in a dusty box of old family papers I'd retrieved from the house during a brief, tense visit to collect some essentials, I discovered something unexpected. It was an unsigned partnership agreement draft from years ago, dated shortly after I joined the business full-time. It detailed a plan for Mark and me to become equal partners upon my father's semi-retirement, outlining specific equity splits based on years of service and projected contributions. It wasn't legally binding, as it wasn't signed by my father, but attached to it was a letter from my deceased grandfather, the business founder, to my father. The letter explicitly stated his wish for the business to eventually be jointly run by both sons, emphasizing my remarkable aptitude for operations and Mark's flair for public relations, suggesting a complementary partnership. My father had disregarded his own father's wishes and concealed this. The letter felt like a voice from the grave, confirming the betrayal extended back years, built on a foundation of deliberate deception about my intended role and value. My hands trembled as I held the thin, yellowed paper. It wasn't just recent favoritism, it was a long-term deception, a planned obliteration. Emily immediately recognized its significance. While not a contract, it established intent, a historical context of expectation that my father had actively undermined. It painted a clear picture of manipulation. It showed this wasn't a sudden decision, but a calculated maneuver against a backdrop of broken promises and hidden schemes. As Emily began making initial inquiries, sending carefully worded letters requesting access to certain business records as a long-term employee and family member, it wasn't a betrayal from someone close, but an unexpected ally. An older gentleman, Mr. Henderson, who had been a long-time manager in the production department before retiring a couple of years ago, contacted me via email. He'd heard whispers about what transpired at Thanksgiving and was appalled. Mr. Henderson had worked closely with me for years and possessed a clear, objective view of my contributions versus Mark's. More importantly, he had maintained meticulous personal logs documenting major operational improvements, identifying who initiated and executed them, records that clearly demonstrated my impact. He also had emails where my father had instructed him to channel certain successful project reports through Mark's office, even when Mark had minimal involvement. Mr. Henderson wasn't family, had nothing personal to gain, but his sense of fairness was strong. He was the objective outsider, the unexpected witness who could corroborate years of my work and my father's deliberate misrepresentation. With Mr. Henderson's detailed records and the grandfather's letter supporting my own documentation, Emily felt we had a strong basis for a legal claim, not necessarily to force my way back into the business, but to seek fair restitution for my years of undervalued work, misused personal funds, and potentially damages related to the broken promise and public humiliation. It was about seeking justice, reclaiming my worth, and compelling them to acknowledge the truth. We initiated the legal proceedings quietly. The initial legal documents landed like a bombshell. My parents and Mark were enraged, their immediate reaction denial and bluster. My father called, roaring about disrespect, ingratitude, and destroying the family name. My mother sent frantic, tearful texts accusing me of betraying them and ruining Thanksgiving memories. Mark even left a condescending voicemail about me being desperate and foolish. They attempted gaslighting again, claiming I was distorting things, that the lawsuit was baseless. But this time, their tactics held no sway over me. I was armed with evidence and legal counsel. I didn't engage. All communication went through Emily. The most intense confrontation occurred during the first deposition. Sitting across the table from my father, mother, and Mark, with Emily beside me and their lawyers opposite, was surreal. My father tried to maintain his authoritative demeanor, but when Emily began presenting the evidence, the grandfather's letter, Mr. Henderson's detailed logs contradicting their claims about Mark's contributions, emails showing deliberate exclusion, his face paled. He stammered, contradicted himself, and his carefully constructed facade began to crumble under the pressure of hard facts and legal questioning. My mother looked devastated, not by the pain they inflicted upon me, but by the potential public embarrassment and financial cost. Mark looked utterly lost, out of his depth without his parents propping him up, exposed as the paper tiger he was. Mr. Henderson's testimony was calm, factual, and damning. He spoke with quiet authority about the day-to-day operations, about who truly performed the work, about the directives he received that made him uncomfortable even then. He was the objective witness, his integrity undeniable, and his words chipped away at their carefully built narrative. This was the moment of justice, not a Hollywood courtroom drama, but a cold, sterile room where the truth, backed by irrefutable evidence, was laid bare, stripping them of their power and their falsehoods. Witnessing their panic, their mask of control slipping, wasn't a moment of pure triumph, but one of quiet, weary vindication. The lawsuit did not proceed to trial. Faced with the evidence and the prospect of a public court case that would expose their deceit and Mark's incompetence, they opted for a settlement. It wasn't everything I could have potentially contended for, but it was substantial, fair compensation for my years of work, reimbursement for personal funds invested, and a clear legal separation from the business and their influence. More importantly than the money, the settlement included a non-disclosure agreement that, while limiting what I could say publicly, also legally documented their acknowledgement of certain facts regarding my contributions and position, forcing a form of accountability. It was a legal boundary drawn in the sand. The repercussions within the extended family and social circle were significant. Some distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the conflict. Some sided with my parents, believing their narrative or valuing the family name over truth. But others, including some I hadn't anticipated, quietly reached out, offering support or sharing their own stories of similar family dynamics. It was a painful pruning of relationships, but necessary. It revealed to me who valued authenticity over appearances. And then came the calls. Exactly 6 months to the day after Thanksgiving, my phone began ringing, unknown numbers at first, then my mother's name flashed across the screen, then my father's. Voicemails accumulated, frantic, tearful, demanding, but never truly apologetic. "Alex, please, you have to call us back," my mother sobbed in one message. "This is a disaster, we need your help," my father barked in another. They didn't mention Thanksgiving, the business, or the lawsuit directly. They simply needed my help with the predicament, the implication being that the consequences of Mark's leadership, or lack thereof, were catching up with them, and they needed the competent son they had discarded. I listened to the voicemails, I saw the endless missed calls, and I felt nothing but calm resolve. There was no triumphant glee, just a quiet certainty. They had made their choice on Thanksgiving night, they had shown me my value to them. They were now facing the logical consequences of that choice, and I was no longer their solution. I didn't hate them, that would still mean they held power over me. I felt a detached pity. They were ensnared by their own values, or lack thereof. I didn't call back. The journey hasn't been easy. Healing is a process, not a destination. The scars from years of seeking validation and the deep wound of that Thanksgiving betrayal remain, but they are no longer open wounds. They are reminders of how far I've come. I've forged a new life, launched my own small enterprise, surrounding myself with individuals who see and value me for who I am. My definition of family has completely transformed. It's not about blood ties or shared history in a business. It's about respect, trust, support, and unconditional acceptance. Looking back, Thanksgiving was the conclusion, but it was also the genesis. The clarity I gained that night, painful as it was the greatest gift they ever bestowed upon me. It liberated me to construct a life on my own terms, outside the shadow of their expectations and manipulations. It revealed to me the importance of boundaries and the fortitude it takes to uphold them, even when it means standing alone against the people who are supposed to love you most. My journey wasn't solely about reclaiming a future in a business, it was about reclaiming myself. Have you ever had to redefine the parameters of family? What does family truly signify?